I think that nurses, with their skill set that they develop and the opportunity in their roles to step into team lead roles and other areas of responsibility, I think that's where you learn whether or not this is of interest to you, not certainly through an education program.
This episode was brought to you by Unify. Download Unify's free IVF conversion and revenue calculator at unify, univfy.com/IVF patient retention. Today's advertiser helped make the production and delivery of this episode possible for free to you. But the themes expressed by the guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Inside Reproductive Health, nor of the advertiser. The advertiser does not have editorial control over the content of this episode, and the guest's appearance is not an endorsement of the advertiser.
Are you a natural when it comes to business? Many nurses are not. I am not in many areas of business, and that's how you know the business books that I write at the end of my career are going to be really good ones, because I sucked at so many of the principles that I'm trying to master, and I'll be able to deliver really good insights with nuance, having struggled with many of them for so many years, be able to give real life examples and really determine the nuance of this lesson versus that lesson, and be able to explain the principle as though someone were a third grader. I have a feeling that a lot of these business principles that we talk about today come naturally to our guest. That's just the impression I get from the way that she thinks about her answers. She's Lisa Dolah. She's the CEO of Ivy Fertility, an MSO that has many clinics on the West Coast, most recently an acquisition in Memphis, and presumably soon to be other parts of the country. She was the CEO of San Diego Fertility Center for 20 years, and she has a nursing background. She started off as a nurse. She got her MBA, and we walk through that career path. So for the nurses listening today, we talk about what it's like to go from nurse to a CEO investor of a private equity-owned network company that owns multiple fertility clinics. Starting off as a nurse, going into research, but with an administrative role that gives you some experience with project management. So contributor, project manager, then getting an MBA, then going into a management analyst role, helping to staff senior management teams, getting that exposure to the role of the people at the top, the roles of the people at the top, working on process improvement, leading to a vice president role, leading then to a CEO role, then to a CEO role in a much bigger company, and as a capitalist, as an investor. We go through each of these points today, and we talk about things like what education is necessary at different points, what skills are necessary, how they relate to nursing, and I press more on how they might not relate to nursing. We talk about negotiation, and hopefully we light a map for the nurses and nursing managers that listen to this show that are thinking about what the next step of their career is and how it might look for the rest of the career. Hopefully it illuminates some possibilities. And if you are thinking about taking action, maybe it gives you the impetus to do so. Hope you enjoy this episode with Lisa Dolah, CEO of Ivy Fertility. Ms. Dolah, Lisa, welcome to Inside Reproductive Health.
Thank you, Griffin. I'm really glad to be here today.
I was interested in having you on because of a career path that I'd like to paint for the nurses and nursing managers that listen to the show, for everyone, but I don't think it's terribly common to even find nurses that become sales directors. Maybe it's more common than it used to be, but CEO is a different story altogether. And so I'd like to go back into your career and then use that as an opportunity to paint a potential map for those that are listening. And I've got in my notes that you were the CEO of San Diego Fertility Center for 20 years. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And that's prior to your current role as CEO of Ivy Fertility. So when's the last time you functioned as a nurse?
Well, I maintained my licensure, and certainly during my career at San Diego Fertility Center over 20 years, I stepped into the nursing role periodically, mostly out of opportunity to connect with our patients but provided bedside care and the PACU and other various functions in fertility. So it's probably only been about 5 years since I think I've actually functioned as a nurse in one capacity or another.
Was CEO your title that whole time since 2003 or whenever, or 2000, whenever it was, or was it practice manager at first, executive director, president? Like, did that change, or was it CEO that the whole time?
It was CEO the whole time. It was an evolution of what that role meant. But certainly, I stepped out of hospital administration into practice administration at San Diego Fertility Center with the title of CEO.
Tell me more about the intermediary roles between nurse starting out and CEO. So, what was your first job after nursing school?
Yeah, so I started my nursing career at Children's Hospital, San Diego, now called Rady Children's, but started that as a new graduate out of college. The primary role and responsibilities I took on as a new graduate was hematology oncology nursing. So we did pediatric oncology treatment, and that was my first career as a nurse. And I did that for about 3 years at Rady Children's.
And then you went into women's health, or you first became a manager in Pete's Hemonc? What happened?
Yeah, yeah. So the journey's fun. I received rewards and knowledge and skills, I think, at each turn. So I took a job after being a pediatric nurse in oncology at Rady's. I moved into infectious disease research. I looked at it as an opportunity to learn some more administrative obligations, regulatory requirements of research, and looked at it as a whole nother way to apply my nursing degree. I did that for the infectious disease program at Rady's Children's in San Diego for probably 3 or 4 years, and then expanded into actually home care nursing at Rady's. That took on a role primarily interest in doing outpatient care for children, but also afforded me some flexibility in my career while I was having children and needed a little bit more flexibility in my schedule, which is great. Nursing offers that many times to us. And so that role in home care nursing provided me the opportunity to work with a little more flexibility while I was raising my kids.
And so, are you a manager at this time, or you're
Nope,
just doing nursing
nope.
care at this point?
Yeah, did nursing care. My infectious disease research position was more an administrative role, organizing, coordinating, and managing those programs. And then about the time that I was ready to step back into my career full time, I went back to school and completed my MBA while I was working as a nurse at Rady Children's. So that was the time in my career where I was looking at opportunity of picking up more administrative skills, business skills, knowledge of accounting principles and other things that I learned during my MBA program.
Why did you get an MBA instead of an MHA?
Good question. I started my master's in nursing, and felt like that was a great opportunity for me, but wanted to broaden my skill set and knowledge into ideas around branding, marketing, business development, uh, you know, plain old accounting, business planning, and I felt like the curriculum through the MBA program would give me a little bit broader knowledge base.
So you had gone back to school. You were in the master's program for nursing, and while you were there, decided to switch to MBA.
That's correct.
And up to this point, you hadn't really had management experience yet, right? Am I understanding that correctly? You had administrative
Correct.
experience with infectious disease research, but was that more like project management?
Correct. Right. So I didn't
Okay.
have line authority management or any other, I hadn't stepped into an opportunity for maybe a team lead role or other kinds of leadership roles in nursing at the time I decided to go to school to get my MBA.
Tell me more about the decision then, because it seems like it was a radical departure if we're just looking at it linearly. But what else was it that had been in the back of your mind, or I suppose not in the back of your mind, but rather forward thinking that you wanted to achieve?
I don't know if I really felt at the time I was making any dramatic shift in my career path. I think as I approached any of my nursing, if you will, roles, I looked at those roles to be broad in nature, certainly contributing to the team that I participated in, both from a patient care perspective, but also as an employee and part of a team, and looking at the services we were delivering. So for me, I think it was just a natural evolution in seeking more of the knowledge in regard to that. But
Did you see yourself as running an organization?
no, I saw myself as participating in an organization. I certainly, simultaneous to starting my MBA program, I started applying for jobs that may utilize more of those skills. So I started to apply for roles like analyst roles, maybe many, early functions were things that would support the nursing departments in analyst type behavior, more of the research based functions. And then as I completed my MBA, I was then applying in the same hospital for a management analyst role, which provided me opportunities to take on understanding the departments of hospitals that maybe nurses interact with, um, but not necessarily have any exposure to, like biomedical department or materials management. And in that situation, actually, stepped into an acting materials manager role. Um, and the biggest compliments I got were from the nursing units that said that I had helped them restructure access to supplies that made their jobs easier. That I understood that nurses don't have time to seek and find supplies, and so as I looked at my role as the manager for materials management, which was obviously initially way outside my skill set. I think I was able to apply a lot of my bedside nursing and nursing science to providing access to supplies in this case, for the nursing units to make their lives easier.
You had that operational empathy because you weren't just looking at it from the 10,000-foot view. You had been one of the nurses that had to get supplies at some point. That management analyst role, was that something that you sought before you went and got your MBA, or that was a result of having gotten your MBA that opportunity opened up to you?
I think it was both. I actually applied for the job before I completed my MBA, and I was afforded that opportunity. Coming with my bachelor's degree in nursing and my MBA in progress. But so that was something that I was supported the senior management team at the hospital in this analyst role. And it was a wonderful opportunity to do that simultaneously with getting my degree.
I'm trying to tease out if it's a good idea for nurses, for anyone, but in this case, nurses, to go get a degree like an MBA if they're not, if it's for the means of tasting and exploring rather than the means to an end. And I think a lot of society would say that higher education is a great place to taste. I'm a big believer that that's the reason for the multi-trillion-dollar debt crisis that we have in this country, that people very often on the undergrad level, but increasingly at the graduate level, are going to taste, and they're tasting something that, one, isn't the most efficient means of tasting. Two, certainly is nowhere near the most cost efficient means. It's extremely expensive, and then might not be what they want to do at all. I'm more of the Cal Newport ilk of you only pursue any given degree from any given institution when you can map your desired outcome. Like, I want this particular job, I want this post, and I know that this degree from this institution is far more likely to land me that role than not. And that's when you get a degree. I think that should be true of undergrad too. It seems though like you did get some of the eye-opening tasting from that, and then that led you into the next step of your career path. So what do you think? Is it a good idea for a nurse to pursue an MBA if it's in the interest of exploration?
Well, it's a large commitment to time, right? And like you mentioned, likely quite expensive. So um, I would not use that as the opportunity to evaluate whether or not an interest in management is of value to a person. I think that nurses, um, you know, with their skill set that they develop and the opportunity in their roles to step into team lead roles and other areas of responsibility. I think that's where you learn whether or not this is of interest to you, not certainly through an education program. Certainly I support higher education, and I think that the value of that for me was tremendous. But a lot of that was through my colleagues that I was in my coursework with, and learning from professionals that had experience that they were sharing. And you don't need to get that through a program. You certainly can do that, with your colleagues at work, or volunteering to take on more responsibility, or seeking that opportunity through a current employer, even if it's just a project at a time. So, nursing education is already fairly broad, and affords you the opportunity to look at roles, I think, without having to pursue education necessarily, or a degree, I guess.
And then you could always then pursue the degree if
Sure.
you developed enough of an interest and realized that that is the intermediary between the next desired role. I want to talk about the management analyst role some more, but well, at this point, the management analyst role, are you starting to manage people there?
I am. And the fun thing about this role, which, I think um, I love to create them in the environments I'm in, because it does provide people interested in stepping out of what might be their traditional, if you will, role channel, mind nursing or clinical, if you will, into something that can support a management team in a variety of ways. And so the management analyst role was really to staff the senior management team with a resource that they could deploy in a variety of different ways. And it gave me a huge opportunity to explore anywhere from, direct line responsibility or analytics on whether or not a business plan makes sense, or, stepping into an interim management position while we were filling that role, or even, process improvement type of projects. So it gave me a broad scope. And I like to see that for people in organizations that maybe step into something without really any previous experience, but willing to learn, and support a management team. So for me, it was a wonderful opportunity to explore all of those different variations of skills and responsibilities, and then gave me and pointed me in the direction that I wanted to step into more of a direct line management role, which is the next job I took in the hospital. So, it afforded me, a learning opportunity, outside of education.
Fertility centers have unique and unmet business needs. Unify uses AI and machine learning to improve IVF conversion, growth, and patients' experience. Providers who counsel patients with the support of the Unify pre-IVF report see a 2 to 5x increase in IVF conversion. That means if you make $10 million in IVF revenue today, you can make $3 million more with Unify. Unify provides AI white glove platform services to IVF centers, including business analytics, IVF live birth prediction modeling to support provider patient counseling, and using AI and machine learning to support IVF pricing strategies that optimize clinical outcomes and profitability. Fertility centers can expect to see ROI from using Unify within 1 to 2 months. Unify's methods have been published in top peer-reviewed medical journals. HIPAA and GDPR compliant, Unify is being used by fertility specialists in the US, Canada, EU, and the UK. Download Unify's free IVF conversion and revenue calculator at unify.com/IVF patient retention. That's Unify, UNIVFY.com/IVF patient retention.
Do you think that your administrative experience in research was necessary for you to be able to step into that management role?
No, not necessarily. I think it provided, I think with everything, I think that the biggest um, learning that can occur for individuals is, and in the example of nursing, is to step kind of outside what you've learned to be your role and look at the organization from a broader perspective. And so for me, research offered me the opportunity to understand regulatory requirements, patient protections around informed consent, and those kinds of things that, as you're in your nursing role, you may not look at it from that perspective. So I think, in any role, whether it's nursing or embryology lab or administrative, if you have the opportunity to step in and look at it from an organizational perspective, and what you're trying to achieve together, I think it gives you the opportunity to bring more value to what you do. So for me, the research component of that just helped me step outside of what was kind of considered to be traditional clinical work, and look at it in a broader scope.
I also think project management is good training wheels for management in many cases. I've had good project managers, and as I'm trying to counsel them on the next step of their career, it's like, this is where you start to practice your management muscles, because a project manager isn't really a manager. They're not directly responsible for people. They're responsible for timelines, and that involves people. And so, in fact, if you can be a good project manager, you're probably going to be a good manager. And if you can be good at the people part of project management, that is, because you can't really fire them in a lot of instances. You don't have a lot of the stick that is part of the carrot, stick, incentives, inspiration, etc., that whole mix that characterizes management and leadership. You don't have many of the tools as a project manager. And if you can be successful in getting people to achieve a cohesive outcome without many of those tools, it's likely that you're going to be successful when you do have more of those tools at your disposal. But you saw more of the value in terms of being able to see the bigger picture, which is what I like about how you described that role of staffing the senior management team, because then you're really getting a lot of exposure to different areas and at a high level at a time, at a phase in your career, which I don't think is terribly common for that maybe intermediary phase, to have that much exposure to the senior team and that many of them either. So what came after that role?
So after that role, I stepped into I guess it was a vice president role at that point of clinical programs at Rady Children's, or at Children's Hospital back then in those days. So I had direct responsibility of a couple of departments that were not necessarily clinical departments. Like I said, some of the back of the house departments, which was great because it gives you the opportunity of how to run an organization that's not just always clinical in nature. I think so that was my next role, and I wanted to go back to a point, and I think it's really important, and I think nursing brings this skill set just as a result of some of their training and experience, and that's the ability to influence people without the authority to do so. And you mentioned that with the project management role, and I think nurses many times are in a position with our patients to influence them and help them, move them to a place that hopefully is better for them without having really necessarily authority over them, right? And so you learn that skill set, and I think that that's one, like you said, that a good project manager can learn how to influence, drive towards results, moving people and influencing people towards a common goal, without being their boss telling them they have to do it. And I think if you can learn that skill set, and apply that, you become a very good leader, because you are able to motivate, align towards a common goal without necessarily having the authority to do that.
You also, when you do have more authority, you have more of those tools. You also have more responsibility. And
Right.
it isn't just getting a couple things done here or there. It's critical to the outcomes that the organization is pursuing. And so what's that like? Where's the departure from what many people might be used to in nursing, from when it starts to become, okay, now I really have to be a manager and a director? So we talked about the similarities. Where's the departure?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think you can apply, your skill set, as a nurse, to your role as a manager. I think the area that may differ is just being able to approach the question from a broader perspective than just a clinical in nature response, right? So, understanding the needs from a clinical perspective, whether that be, quality of care and service delivery and training, but also then understanding the context of what you're trying to achieve as an organization. And I think, that's that next level that we as nurses, need to challenge ourselves to do, because as you do that, you can then advance your own specific, if you will, objectives, but in the context of what the organization is trying to achieve at the same time.
And this is happening while you're vice president of one of the clinical teams at Ramy. Then when does fertility come
So
into
then
the
I got a
radar?
great calling. I had two physicians, in San Diego that were interested in starting their own fertility practice and asked me to help them and advise them on setting up a laboratory, building out a surgery center, understanding what the regulations look like, the regulatory requirements, the facility components of that, and then building out that team. So it was two physicians that had two clinical office staffs. They were leaving the hospital that had the lab in the surgery center, and they asked me to join them.
Did you know the two doctors, or were you headhunted by a recruiter?
No, I knew them through connections. So because I was at pediatric hospital, we did a lot with women's health, labor and delivery. So I knew them through that relationship. And that was back in the era when most of these physicians were leaving larger institutions. And honestly, I thought at that time, in fact, I think that was part of my first hire objective, that it was a temporary part-time consulting job. I thought I would consult, with them on how to do this, and that I would gravitate back to pediatrics. And
Famous last words.
yeah, we know what happened with that.
So you go off with these two REIs at that time. It was two docs.
Correct.
And how many people did you hire originally?
So they both each had individual practices with about, maybe 5 employees each. So 10 employees or so came together. And then we staffed the surgery center and the lab. We fortunately, were able to recruit one of the embryologists that was with them in their former lab. So he joined as well. In fact, he's still working in the same location. But after that, then it was building out kind of the team as we grew that center.
So when it was 2021, or whenever you went up from San Diego Fertility Center to Ivy, when you had 2 physicians and 10 employees to start, how many physicians, how many employees when you made that transition at the end?
5 physicians and 120 employees, maybe.
So a 10 employee organization is
Little easier.
yeah, it almost doesn't look anything like a 120 employee
Right.
organization.
And we expanded into other locations and also expanded kind of geographically, as
So
well.
your title the whole time is CEO, but it's clearly a very different job from when you have 10 people, when you
Absolutely.
have 120 and you have one office or two offices versus covering multiple geographies. What were the biggest changes in that time period? Like, of course, you could say a lot of different things, but think of it in milestones. What do you view as the biggest milestones over those 20 years in terms of the changing in the development of your role?
I think it's well, all it's always learning, right? I don't know that the role changed. The scope of responsibility obviously did, but with the 10 employees, my job was to bring two centers together and to align them with a common vision, and to help them understand change associated with taking on a surgery center and a lab, and then take on change on how they work together versus two centers. My role really didn't change like much. 20 years later was very similar. It was just moving more people, and many times more movement in a faster period of time, right? And how to communicate that, and how to align my teams around what we were trying to do. Much easier when you have 10 people you can gather together, versus geographically disparate groups and much larger dynamics. So certainly hiring and recruiting physicians got added to the mix, as the two physicians and I decided that was how they wanted to grow their business. Um, Certainly working with international based programs, learning regulations, learning how to find paths to grow our center, improve outcomes for our patients. So, a lot of that just evolved. But I think that you're applying the same skill set, whether it's 10 people or 1,000 people. You know, it's just how you do that.
I noticed you didn't say anything about middle management. How much hierarchy is there when you have 10 people?
There's none. I mean, we had team leaders. We had a surgery center team leader and a lab director. We didn't end up with a lot of hierarchy when we had 100 people either, really. It's a team-based structure. So, people have the opportunity to step into leadership roles relative to, staffing an area, maintaining regulatory requirements. But, even in a 100-person environment, there's not a lot of layers.
There isn't a lot of that surprises me because as you start to delegate decision making authority, that in and of itself builds somewhat of a hierarchy. The person that might be seeing patients isn't making the same decisions as who to hire in for the nursing team or what the standard operating procedures should be, etc. And so, what was that delegation of decision making authority like then?
I kind of look at it as kind of an empowerment model, which I think comes back from my nursing ranks. This is about identifying, by teams what the team wants to, how the team wants to manage themselves, and sometimes that they empower themselves to be self-led, and sometimes they prefer to have some authority structure. So we evolved our teams around kind of what interests we had by our employees to step into areas of accountability, and kind of meet the demands of what was being asked of them at that time. So it's hard for me to say. I think when you live it, it's kind of hard to go back and analyze it. But I think the evolution of our field and fertility has been exciting, and certainly has taken on tremendous opportunity for our employees and team members, nursing, embryologists, physicians, to really step outside of that role and learn how to evolve their business. And so we didn't necessarily do that with a real structured process.
I'm having a hard time analyzing it now. What does it do to continuity, though? Like, I see a lot of fertility centers having a challenge where people are practicing very differently from one another in the same practice, and people are using different standard operating procedures. And I am not a clinician. I'm not qualified to speak on it. I just see a lot of operational disparity. And it seems to me like it's one of the things stopping the field from scaling, because I see all of these solutions that are coming into the place in order to be able to scale different people's workflow, to be able to automate, to be able to use artificial intelligence. And I see a very slow adoption because people are doing a lot of different things, and it would be difficult to make things uniform in such a way where they can adopt those solutions at scale. And as a result, we've got bottleneck problems all over the field. That's what I can see is not having a hierarchy, is not having like very specific, rigid structure. I don't want to say rigid. It should be flexible, but certainly delineated. Is that a challenge for being able to scale a fertility center?
I don't know. I mean, I'd like to I kind of hear more about your observations, and maybe using a specific example to help. I haven't seen. My feeling is that maybe all the things you just described are true. I don't know that a rigid structure is necessarily going to achieve, be the tool that you necessarily need. I guess I'd want to understand more about the question.
I don't mean to say rigid, but I do mean to say delineated. So rigid would mean inflexible, and it should be flexible, but it should also be identifiable. And one of the things that I see, it's very different. You can go into a clinic and this doc is doing the workups after the first visit. This doc is doing the workups before the first visit. This doc is having an ultrasound tech do the ultrasounds, and this doc is doing it themselves. And I can't speak to what's the right answer, but it seems to me like when you have such disparity, and as you add provider after provider, and then all of the teams that come with each provider, that it makes it really hard to adopt solutions that you might use to take what it might be 500 cycles a year to 5,000, because everybody's doing things a different way.
That makes sense. And I think you're correct. We have always tried, a model that is agreement on some standardization, right? You're going to have your 80% rule, 80 plus, right? So 80% of the time, it should kind of follow a similar process. And I think what happens, there's always exceptions, and patients are not unique individuals. I mean, are not identical individuals, and they need unique applications. So, true 100% standardization, I think is not appropriate. But, as you think about processes, right, and empowering our teams to be independent actors on a daily basis, they need a structure that they understand and that they're supported if they follow. So, what we always looked at was, let's work with the physician clinical team if it was clinical in nature from a process perspective, and let's get alignment. Let's get agreement on what is the 80% rule, right? And there's always going to be exceptions. And then how do we communicate those exceptions so that the people that are expected to follow the process understand when those can be deviated from. And it empowers your team. So if you think about the nursing coordinators, if they have kind of standard operating protocols that the physicians traditionally follow within certain parameters, it makes their job easier and clearer, and they have the authority to act within their scope of practice. That doesn't mean you can't deviate, but then how do they know you're going to deviate, right? And so I think a lot of it is around just clarity on what is expected and what is supported, and then you need your teams to support those, right? You can't have the undermining going on where everybody agreed to a process and then so and so always goes around the process, right? And that's a much harder thing to do than it sounds, right? But getting those, in this case, maybe physicians aligned around how are we going to try to standardize things within some parameters, knowing that as an individual practitioner, we can always vary that with some exception. But if we want to make our organization as efficient as possible in supporting us in the most efficient manner and give some independent um, accountability and authority to our employees, then let's provide the structure that they function within.
That might be what we're talking about. And I hope I'm not straying from the career path for nurses too much that they're listening and starting to get bored. I hope that it's still germane to the conversation, because if you want to be a leader, this is the type of thing that you're going to have to struggle with. You're going to have to think about these kinds of things, because I'm going to write a few different business books later on in my career, Lisa, one of which is going to be a coffee table book of all of the pieces of business advice that contradict each other. All of these axioms that you see on LinkedIn, there is another axiom to contradict it, and you could take either to an extreme. And becoming a really good leader is understanding all of the asterisks that qualify each of those axioms. I really believe that. It's going to be a great coffee table book, by the
Awesome.
way.
Well,
But
I think tying it back to nursing, I think as nurses mature in their own role and field, again, we're applying the same principles. You as a nurse have a foundation and a framework to approach every patient situation. You're always going to have variation, and understanding when you can vary from that versus what is and why. But the nursing profession is exciting because I think you have tremendous platform for you know different channels depending on your interest, and pharmaceutical lines, education and development areas, management. There's a variety of different ways you can take the science of nursing and apply it to other professional tracks.
how many nurses, what percentage that you've worked with over the course of your career, which is a lot, do you think have it in them to be an executive? And do not say 100%. Do not say all of them. I don't want any kind of fluffy millennial feel good answer. I
I mean,
you work with a ton of people. Ballpark. What are the percentage that you feel like really have it within them that they could be not manager, not director, but top C-suite?
anybody that sets their mind out to do it can do it, but you have to be willing to learn and step out of kind of a comfort of a clinical based mindset. And I think um, many nurses don't want to have anything to do with that. They went into the profession to be a clinical focused expert, and they should. That's amazing, and they should continue to explore that how they can continue to contribute there. Um, there's only so many individuals that went into nursing originally that then look at organizational, um, uh, goals and organizational, you know, success as being something that they're even interested in being responsible for. So, we all can contribute at every level of nursing to that organization's success, whether or not you want to be the one that's thinking about that 100% of the time is only in interest of certain individuals. And but I don't think any nurse should limit themselves um, to that possibility if that's something they're interested in doing.
We've talked about how many similarities there are between what a nurse has to do in his or her day-to-day responsibilities and what's necessary for business leadership. I also think that there are some places where there is more of a departure in terms of the averages. And I talk sometimes on the show about the big five personality traits: conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness to experience, and extroversion. And people that are in positions of leadership are usually not the most disagreeable, because they have to advance other people's interests, but they're seldom highly agreeable people. They're usually kind of in the middle. And I think that there's literature. I couldn't possibly reference it to you, but I think there is literature showing how much more nurses are agreeable on average than the average person. And so I think that's an area where you might see a difference of, well, in one scenario, your role is to totally care for someone, and you're really having that interest at heart, and you need that quality in leadership. You have to have that, otherwise you're a tyrant. But you also need to make really hard decisions and not be popular in many cases, and feel like, gosh, I disappointed this person sometimes, because it's the cost of making the right decision for the future of the organization. Did you feel like you had to make an adjustment, or is your personality already kind of, in the middle of the road anyway?
I must be in the middle of the road. I didn't feel like I was making that adjustment. But, I also felt like even in my nursing role, there were times where you were doing things that weren't making your patient happy. They didn't, in fact, like you because you were doing what was best for them. Certainly, as a pediatric nurse, I found that out. But you knew that you were making the right choice, given the circumstance you were in, and in that case, on your patient's behalf. So I don't know that I necessarily felt like I had to be a certain personality in order to tolerate some of those difficult times when you are making maybe unpopular decisions. I think my role is to be able to support those and communicate those. And that's how I felt as a pediatric nurse, that maybe I wasn't, providing chemotherapy to a child that really made them happy, but I felt good about what we needed to do, and I could explain it to the best of my ability of why we needed to do it.
What separates a manager or director, someone at that level, from top exec in your view?
Scope of responsibility, really. And I don't know that necessarily it's a different skill set.
If it weren't a different skill set, or if it weren't a particular development of some of the specific skills, then wouldn't we expect everybody to have the same career path? So we have very few people at the tippy top, and they have something that got them there that others didn't. You can't think of what that might be?
I feel like anybody that wants to achieve it can. So I guess it's just maybe a personal choice, that this wasn't the next, if they felt that they had to achieve the next level, if you will, versus contributing significantly at the place that they are, whether that be a team lead or director or, um, I don't see it necessarily as being something that everybody really necessarily wants to take on as a level of responsibility, but that doesn't mean that they're not any less capable.
Why wouldn't someone want to take it on? If CEO is the most glamorous thing that somebody could be in an Instagram world, where being a CEO, being an entrepreneur, being at the top is the most glorious thing, why wouldn't someone want that?
I don't know that. Well, I'll speak for myself. I didn't aspire to be a CEO to have it be glamorous. Certainly doesn't feel like it all the time. So it's for me, it's a choice, to lead an organization towards the goals that I feel are important, and it's not about glamour. It That's not why you take this job, because if you do, then you're taking it for the wrong reason.
Well, and the answer might be because it sucks sometimes, and that if you're what you're looking for is glamour, you're not going to see that very often. Maybe you perceive that it doesn't suck very often because you're just wired to do it, and that's how you found yourself in this role. Does it ever suck sometimes?
No, really? Yes.
We went from nurse to not project manager, but research analyst, with an administrative, working in research with an administrative function. You went back into home care, then you went and got your MBA. Then you started working in a management analyst role, and then you started working in staffing senior management teams. And that led you into process improvement, and that led you into a vice president role. Eventually, you came over to fertility and CEO. And then you took another leap recently where you went from the CEO of a group that was owned by a few physicians and maybe lab director to a company that has more people as financiers and presumably more sophisticated financiers. Did you own equity in Fertility Center of San Diego at the time of sale?
No.
Do you own equity now as CEO as part of Ivy?
I personally invested in it, yes.
So then you've gone from contributor, project manager, vice president, CEO, and now you're also capitalist. So what have the differences been? What have you had to learn when now we're working with private equity folks who have limited partners? What were some of the things that you had to learn that you, even if you were familiar with them, you really had to dig deeper into?
Well, I want to go back, first of all, to all the people that are adding up all those years of work. I'm not as old as it sounds. Actually, I am as old as it sounds. So
we never specified most of the years. So over
yeah,
that, it
right,
could have
right.
been
They were partial years, right?
could have been breezing through it.
I job hopped very quickly, right? Um, it's like anything. It's learning relationships and moving from a hospital system where the relationships had to do with board members and nonprofit organizations and physician relations, and moving into private practice, it was different. We had less equity participants. I had two at the start, but it's with everything. It's learning those relationships and aligning goals. But again, you're just applying the same skill set that I did back when I ran a materials management department.
Yeah, but what specific skills did you have to bone up on, like shareholder rules or types of, like what did you have to learn more of?
I don't know that I have. I understand obviously the legal structure. You have to read the papers and understand the documents and know what you're building and what the structure is from when you're talking to employees or physicians or others about how the structure works. But that's not really a skill set. It's just understanding it so you can explain it.
I want to let you conclude with how you'd like to conclude for nurses that might be listening and thinking about their career path. But before we do that, what do nurses need to know about negotiation?
Negotiation. I think you just know to believe in yourself, be clear on what you are representing and what you need, and what you're asking for, and how that adds value to whether it's your patient or your care or your role or your organization. And the negotiation after that should be easy.
Are they used to it? I'm asking this because my maternal grandmother was a nurse. My paternal grandmother was a nurse. My mother was a nurse. My sister was a nurse. All labor and delivery, by the way.
Good for them. Are awesome.
And these are people that are reluctant to ask for like a refill for their water at a restaurant. So, are there things that you did to practice negotiation outside of just doing it? Were there particular lessons that you needed to get better at? And if so, what were they? Or were there other things that you studied that were helpful?
Not really. I'm probably just like your mom. I probably don't. If my meal comes out, I don't like it, I don't return it.
I never do either, by the way. I seldom do.
No, I think it's. I always say, get clear on the why. Why are you asking for this, and be able to articulate why, whatever it is. And if it is meaningful and right in your own mind, and you have the why clear, then it's not really feeling like you're negotiating. It's just that you're articulating what's needed. So I'm not.
What if the why is entirely in my self-interest and not in the other person's?
Then good. and you're probably going to learn how to negotiate, because that's certainly not the skill set I bring to the table.
Then learn the hard way, kid.
Exactly.
I do see that, and I am also a little bit more on the agreeable end of the spectrum. I'm not far on agreeableness. I'm still probably on the bell curve, but I'm on the agreeable side. I think it's actually a good place to be in business because I am agreeable enough I really want to advance other people's interests. And if I'm ever at a place where there's a client feeling like they didn't get enough value, I can't sleep at night. Not even if and I've never had things that are real bad, but if they're even just like, yeah, that was okay. It's like, oh, I can't stand it. I want to advance other people's interests, but I'm also not so agreeable that I'm going to work for little money or take on really bad terms that aren't in my interest. And when I started negotiating, I very often would get trapped in the deserve round. Well, I did this, therefore. And I see people, especially those that are more agreeable, when they're learning to negotiate, they're starting to do it, they tend to get in deserve mode. And I realized it's, at least in my view, it is very useful to just eliminate deserve from the entire lexicon. It has nothing to do with me deserving things. And I think having clients as opposed to having one employer over the years has been helpful for that. There's no me saying I just deserve that. If I can't prove a value to the client, they just let us go. And so it's always, this is how this advances your interest. And it sounds to me like you probably maybe already knew that instinctively, and so that's why you're not even thinking of like when you say clarifying the why, maybe you just had that to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How would you like to conclude for the nursing manager, let's say the young nursing manager listening right now that's thinking, maybe I want to take the next step in my career? What advice would you give to that person, and or any other thought you'd like to conclude the show with?
Well, I'm speaking to one I just hired in Memphis. She's coming out of a hospital or surgery center experience, and she's stepping into the practice administrator role. And, for her and anybody else, if this is a role that you want to learn, we'll be here to support you. And so if it's something that you want as a nurse to step into something that maybe is outside of what you perceive to be your training, I think you need to seek that opportunity, and ask for those around you to support you in learning things that maybe you don't have any experience in yet. And I think nursing has a tremendous foundation to offer you the skill set in a variety of roles, whether it's administrative, management, leadership, or, like you said, project management, sales, marketing, business development. All of those things are ways, training, teaching, for nurses to advance their career. And so it's not just one path, but I think nursing has tremendous foundational value that you can build on if you're interested in.
So for those of you that are on the fence, maybe you take a shot, because we could probably use a couple more nurses at the top. Lisa Vandolah, thank you very much for coming on Inside Reproductive Health.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
This episode was brought to you by Unify. Download Unify's free IVF conversion and revenue calculator at unify, unify.com/IVF patient retention. You've been listening to the Inside Reproductive Health podcast with Griffin Jones. If you're ready to take action to make sure that your practice thrives beyond the revolutionary changes that are happening in our field and in society, visit fertilitybridge.com to begin the first piece of the fertility marketing system, the goal and competitive diagnostic. Thank you for listening to Inside Reproductive Health.